This starts with a strip of fabric cut on the true bias. The length is, 5 or 6 inches at the most, and the width is 1 3/4. You can go a little wider or a little narrower. The point being that you want a strip that is longer and wider than what you're going to make. It seems counterintuitive, but larger pieces are easier to work than smaller pieces. So this is our strip. Next, we go to the pressing table. What we'll be doing here is stretching the strip lengthwise while pressing. The object here is to get all of the stretch out of the strip. If you make a bias tube and it has some stretch, ultimately the stitches that hold it closed will break. So pulling it so that it has no stretch is what we're doing here. Notice that we've lost a full 1/2 inch of width by stretching this. That's as it should be. That's why we start with a wider strip and stretch. It'll become narrower and it'll serve our purposes better. Next, we will fold the strip lengthwise and pin it to paper. I'm using cash register tape. You could use really any paper that you have at hand. I like the cash register tape because it tears easily and it's easy to contain. So fold the fabric and pin it to the paper. Now we sew. We're going to put this under the foot, and we shorten the stitch length to 1.0 to 1.5. And we're going to sew what I call a funnel. When you're making a tube, you don't want to just start by sewing at the finished width. You want to sneak up on it. So what I'm doing here is I'm sewing down, and the stitch length is so short because we want a lot of control and we want a lot of strength. So now the distance between the needle and the edge is maybe 1/8 of an inch. So what you'll do now is you'll just keep sewing. So this machine stitch runs parallel to the folded edge of the fabric. So now I'm going to give you a good look at this. Now you can see here, see that funnel? That is what you want. That is going to make this easy to turn right side out. So our next step is we'll turn this over and we'll tear away the paper, and I'll take it over to the table to trim. Again, the stitch length, 1.0 to 1.5. The shorter the stitch length, the easier it is to tear. And I'll show you a little bit here. See how easy? Next, we trim the seam allowance off a little bit narrower than the width of the tubing. You can use this with the scissors. You can trim it with a rotary cutter. I prefer the rotary cutter. So here we have another reason you want the short stitches is you have almost no seam allowance there. Our next step, turning right side out. For the next step, I like to use Mara 30. It's a Gutermann thread, and you use it for buttonholes, sewing on buttons. It's a stout thread. You're going to thread it into a needle that has somewhat of a large eye, because this is what we're going to use to turn this bias tube right side out. So, before we turn it, what we want to do here is just trim that off. And you could trim this down a little bit. You want to get rid of bulk so that this will turn in on itself. So the next step here is to come in and you will put the needle through. You're going to create a little slip knot. This is going to help everything to hold until you turn. So now, with the largish eyed needle, you're going to feed that into the tube. So you can get this out here. Okay, so we have the thread down into the tube. Now this is the trick. If you're turning this right side out, to begin, you want this to open up slightly so that this little seam allowance can tuck in. Now this is where, don't get impatient. You want to just gently tug until the fabric all folds over and wants to turn in. And you just gently, gently coax it. And so there will come a point, you can see this, where it all is starting to turn right side out. Now you just keep gently easing up the tube over. Sorry about that. We're just going to keep going here. Now, see, the beauty of taking all the stretch out before you made the tube and sewed the tube is that the tube can expand at this point to accommodate the mass. You can see it's starting to do what we want it to do. And this is one of those things, don't get frustrated. You just have to be gentle. It's sort of like with someone you love. You're gentle, and gentle coaxing will eventually get you what you want. So little at a time, little at a time, little at a time. And I want to show you this whole thing. Normally I would fast forward to the end, but I just want you to get a sense of, don't despair, don't throw up your hands in disgust, just carefully, carefully coax it. Because there will come a point, especially when this mass emerges at the end here, which we're almost there, I can feel it. Okay. And here, don't let it bunch up here. Don't let there be a big bunch. Make sure it's turning as you're pulling. Okay. So now, the temptation is just to give it a good pull and have it turn. But just, again, gently, 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 gently guide it. And voila. So you can massage this a little bit so that the seam allowances flatten out. And there you are.